Lying in your bunk, lights dimmed to a deep sea blue. The hull of the research vessel groans around you. A lullaby of metal and pressure. You made a simple choice before shutting your eyes to keep the live hydrophone feed playing on the cabin speaker. Just the ocean's heartbeat, soothing. Right, the first hour is nothing but the distant moan of shifting ice and the low, lonely call of a fin whale. Your breathing slows. The abyss sounds peaceful. Then the hydrophone picks up something that doesn't belong. A mechanical click, too rhythmic to be natural. A whisper of static that sounds almost like breathing back at you. Your eyes snap open, but the cabin is still empty. The deep-sea microphone is now transmitting knocking. Slow, deliberate, metallic. It's coming from directly beneath the keel. 8,000 feet down, you tell yourself it's a malfunctioning sonar buoy or a shifting hydrothermal vent. Then the hydrophone captures a voice, clear as frozen glass. It speaks a single word, your own name stretched into a wet, hungry gurgle. You try to kill the feed, but the switch is already off. The deep-sea hydrophone isn't receiving anymore, it's projecting, and whatever learned your name in the hadal dark just started climbing toward your hull. Tonight, you're going to hear 3 true accounts from souls who made that very mistake, the idea they all share. The one rule you never break at sea is simple. Never sleep next to the deep-sea hydrophone, because the abyss doesn't dream. It listens, and it has been waiting for someone like you to drift off with the speaker on. Dr. Alan Kessler never considered himself a superstitious man, not in 22 years of deep-sea research. The ocean was his laboratory, a world of predictable physics and catalogued biology. But tonight, 12 miles off the Oregon coast, he'd made a quiet, catastrophic error. The RV Abyssal Echo rocked gently on a calm Pacific swell, her steel hull groaning with the rhythm of the tide. Alan's bunk was a narrow coffin of foam and flannel, tucked into a cabin barely larger than a supply closet outside the porthole. Black water pressed against the glass like frozen ink. He was exhausted, bone-deep tired from 16 straight hours calibrating the new deep-sea hydrophone array. It sat on the seafloor, 8,700 feet below the keel, listening to the planet's hidden voice. The hydrophone feed was a live audio stream piped into every corner of the ship through the internal speaker system. Most of the crew shut it off before turning in. Nobody wanted to hear the abyss while they slept, but Alan found it soothing, a lullaby of distant seismic murmurs and the occasional cerulean moan of a blue whale. He let his eyelids droop, the cabin speaker crackling softly with the sound of a current sweeping over the array. You exhale slowly, letting the tension bleed from your shoulders. The first hour passed in dreamless black, the hydrophone humming a primal sleepy drone. Somewhere in the deep, a pod of dolphins clicked and whistled far away, a sound like children laughing in an empty cathedral. Alan rolled onto his side, pulling the thin blanket up to his chin, his breathing slow and steady. Then the speaker emitted a sound that didn't belong, a single mechanical click, sharp, metallic, perfectly isolated in the sterile quiet of the seafloor. Alan's brow furrowed in his sleep, but he didn't wake. Take a shallow breath, the noise settling into your subconscious. The click came again and again, falling into a deliberate, syncopated rhythm. Click, pause, click, click, pause, click. It wasn't random, it was patterned, almost like Morse code tapping against the hull of the hydrophone. Alan's eyes flicked open, the sleep suddenly thin and fragile. He stared at the ceiling, listening, his heart beginning to climb into his throat. You hold still, breath caught in your chest. He told himself it was a malfunction, a shifting plate in the subduction zone. Loose equipment knocking against the titanium housing. Any rational explanation would do. He closed his eyes again, forcing his muscles to unclench, but the clicking refused to fade. Now it sounded closer, as if whatever produced it had moved up the water column. The cabin speaker crackled, and a new layer of sound bled through the feed, a low-frequency hum. So deep, Alan felt it in his molars before he heard it with his ears. The bunk vibrated, just barely, the metal frame humming a sympathetic note. You swallow hard. the dryness in your throat suddenly painful. He sat up, swinging his legs over the edge of the bunk. The overhead light switch was a bare plastic toggle by the door. But he didn't move toward it. Something in his gut whispered that light would make it worse, that whatever was happening needed to stay in the dark where it belonged. He sat frozen, bare feet on the cold deck, listening to the hydrophone. The clicking stopped. Silence flooded the speaker, a heavy, oppressive nothing that was somehow louder than the noise before. Alan could hear his own pulse hammering in his eardrums, the thin whine of blood rushing too fast. You let out a trembling breath, almost a sigh of relief then. The hydrophone picked up a knocking 3 distinct raps, slow and deliberate. Like knuckles against a hardwood door, they came from deep within the feed, 8,000 feet of black water compressing the sound into something thick and unmistakably human. Alan's mouth went dry, his fingers gripping the edge of the mattress until the fabric bunched in his fists. That was not seismic activity, that was not a loose clamp. Something was at the hydrophone. He lunged for the intercom panel mounted on the wall, fumbling in the dark for the cold plastic button.
"Bridge, this is Kessler. Are you seeing anything on sonar?" Static hissed back at him. The intercom dead. He tried again, pressing harder, his knuckle whitening against the switch. Nothing. The knocking came faster. A frantic burst of desperate, urgent pounding, and then the speaker began to scream. Not a voice. Not yet, just a wall of white noise that shrieked through the cabin like a ruptured steam pipe. Alan clamped his hands over his ears, the sound of physical weight pressing against his skull. You grit your teeth, a sharp breath sucked between them. The shrieking collapsed into a sudden vacuum of silence, and then the hydrophone spoke. A single word carried on a wet, gurgling exhale.
As if the speaker was a throat half filled with seawater. Alan, his name stretched into 2 liquid syllables, the vowels mangled by a tongue that didn't belong in a human mouth. The temperature in the cabin plunged. Alan's breath pluming in the air, his skin prickling with gooseflesh. He stumbled backward, his spine hitting the cold bulkhead, eyes locked on the speaker grill in the corner of the ceiling. You're breathing shallowly, chest tight and rapid. He'd left the hydrophone feed on, that was all. It had to be an acoustic anomaly, a recording played back by a glitching system, a sick prank from a crewmate on the bridge. But the voice, it knew his name. Alan hadn't recorded any audio logs, hadn't spoken his own name into a microphone since the pre-cruise briefing. Yet the Abyss had fished it out, and was now tasting it in the dark. He forced his legs to move, crossing the narrow cabin to the speaker control panel, a simple analog dial, marked volume cabin feed. He twisted it hard to the left, the plastic knob scraping against the stop. The speaker went silent, a blessed fragile piece returning to the cramped space. Alan stood there, panting, his hand trembling against the wall. Take a long, shaky breath, trying to steady yourself. He stayed like that for maybe 2 minutes, staring at the inert speaker grill, convincing himself it was overexhaustion, auditory pareidolia, the human brain desperate to find patterns in chaos. He was a scientist. He knew the litany of rationalizations. He was already crafting the explanation he'd give the captain in the morning. And then the speaker came back on. The dial was still set to 0, the internal circuit physically disconnected, but sound bled out of the grill regardless. This time it wasn't a single word, it was a whispered phrase, intimate and close down here, so cold. Let me up. The voice was pulling itself together. The words clearer now, the gurgle fading into something almost human. Alan stared at the dead dial, a thin whimper escaping his throat, his scientific mind crashing against an impossible shoreline. The hydrophone wasn't receiving anymore. It was projecting. Something on the seafloor, 8,000 feet below, was speaking into the microphone from the wrong side. You can't catch your breath, the air gone thin and metallic. He tore open the cabin door and stumbled into the corridor, the emergency lights casting pools of jaundiced yellow on the deck plates. The passageway was empty, the rest of the 6-person crew sealed in their own cabins. Oblivious Alan ran barefoot toward the bridge ladder, the cold steel biting into the soles of his feet, his mind a frantic drumbeat of escape. But the speaker in the corridor was on as well, the hydrophone feed hardwired into the ship's intercom backbone. The knocking followed him, now transformed into a scraping, metallic shriek, the sound of something heavy dragging itself up the hull of the Abyssal Echo. Alan froze at the base of the ladder, one hand on the rung, the sound traveling upward from beneath the deck. It was climbing hand over hand along the anchor chain, up the steel plates of the keel. The noise resonated through the entire ship, a chorus of tortured metal that vibrated in his bones. He scrambled up the ladder, bursting onto the bridge. The panoramic windows, a terrifying mirror of black ocean and pale moonlight. The sonar station glowed in the corner, a circular amber screen, and Alan lunged toward it, slamming his palm on the console. The display flickered, and the image it painted sent ice through his veins. A massive, amorphous contact rising from the seafloor directly beneath the ship. It was huge, 50 meters across, and it was ascending with a deliberate, predatory speed. The bridge speaker crackled to life, the voice now fully formed, dripping with a hunger that had no place in the natural world. Alan, open the door, it's so dark, let me in. He fumbled for the VHF radio, thumbing the transmit switch with a shaking hand. Mayday, mayday, this is research vessel Abyssal Echo. We have a contact, unknown mass, bearing vertical, requesting immediate. The transmission dissolved into a screech of interference. The same white noise from the cabin swallowing his words whole. Something heavy, enormous struck the underside of the hull. A deep, resonant boom rolled through the ship, throwing Alan sideways into the navigation table, his hip connecting with sharp aluminum books, and charts cascaded to the deck. A coffee mug shattered, the vessel groaning like a wounded animal. You cry out, a sharp, desperate gasp. The knocking became a pounding, a rhythmic, thunderous assault on the steel plates directly below the bridge. Boom, boom. Each impact sent a visible shudder through the deck, the window frames rattling in their seals. The voice on the speaker was laughing now, a wet, choking sound, full of delighted malice. Alan looked down through the bridge window, past the edge of the deck, into the water. The moonlight broke on the surface, and for one frozen moment he saw it, a pale, enormous shape pressing against the hull, a suggestion of limbs too long, fingers too many, spreading across the steel like a starfish made of bleached bone and shadow. One appendage rose from the foam and tapped softly against the glass. 3 slow knocks. He fell backward, scrambling away from the window, his mind a white blank of primal terror. The radio suddenly cleared, a Coast Guard voice crackling through the static. Abyssal Echo, this is Sector Columbia River. We received a partial mayday. State your emergency. Alan grabbed the mic, but the words wouldn't form behind him. The bridge speaker spoke instead, parroting his own voice back in a garbled, mocking tone. Mayday, mayday, it's so dark. Let me in. He ran down the port passageway, past the crew quarters banging on sealed doors, screaming for the others to wake up. No one answered. The pounding on the hull had stopped, replaced by a new sound, a slithering wet dragging against the outer bulkhead. Something was moving around the ship, searching for an opening, a porthole, a hatch left unsealed. Alan reached the stern fantail, the cold night air blasting his face. The Pacific sprawled black and endless before him. He had nowhere left to go. The speaker mounted above the deck door crackled. The voice, now a throaty whisper, patient and certain, found you. Don't sleep. Never sleep next to the hydrophone. Your hyperventilating tears, cutting hot tracks down cold cheeks. The Coast Guard cutter John Midget found the Abyssal Echo adrift 36 hours later, engines idling, lights blazing across empty decks. All 6 crew members were gone, life rafts untouched, EPIRB signal still transmitting from its bracket in the bridge. The sonar recorded a single final contact, a massive object descending rapidly back into the hadal trench, vanishing off the screen at 9,000 feet. And on the ship's data recorder, the hydrophone log captured something they never made public. A single audio file, 3 hours long, of a wet, breathing silence, punctuated by a voice that whispered every crew member's name, one by one, over and over. until the recorder was manually switched off from the inside. Emily Hartwell had spent 3 years training for this deployment, a solo acoustic survey of the Monterey Canyon. The deep-sea hydrophone array was her doctoral thesis, her entire academic future dangling on a cable 3,000 feet down. Tonight, she was alone aboard the Cetacean Dream, a converted 40-foot trawler moored over the abyss. The cabin was small and cluttered with equipment, monitors glowing soft green in the dark, the Pacific rocking her like a cradle. She'd been monitoring beaked whale vocalizations, a rare species that only clicked in the deepest trenches. The hydrophone feed played through a pair of tinny overhead speakers, a constant stream of oceanic static and distant biological chatter. Emily found it comforting, proof that the canyon was alive, that her research meant something. She pulled her sleeping bag up to her chin, telling herself she'd just rest her eyes for 10 minutes. You exhale slowly, letting the exhaustion take over. The hydrophone hummed a lullaby of deep current and shrimp snaps, a crackling white noise that blurred into a sonic blanket. Emily's breathing slowed, the glow of the monitors dimming behind her closed eyelids. She dreamed of her father, a commercial diver who'd been lost to a saturation accident when she was 12, his voice still vivid in her memory. Then, the speaker emitted a sound that knifed through the dream, a high-frequency ping, singular and crystalline, like a sonar pulse fired from directly beneath the hull. Emily stirred, her brow creasing, but the exhaustion was a heavy drug. She didn't wake. Your breathing is shallow, the sound penetrating the haze of sleep. The ping came again, then a second, then a third, spacing themselves into a deliberate, searching rhythm. It wasn't cetacean, the frequency was too sharp, too manufactured. Deep in her sleep, Emily's mind registered the pattern, and a cold trickle of unease seeped into her dreamscape. The dream of her father shifted, his face dissolving into static, his voice distorting into an echo. She jolted awake, eyes wide, the cabin spinning in the dim green light. The speaker was silent now, nothing but the steady hiss of the hydrophone's baseline noise. Emily stared at the speaker grill, her heart thudding, a cold sweat gluing her t-shirt to her back. You gasp softly, a sharp intake of night air. She told herself it was a military sonar test. The Navy ran exercises off the California coast all the time, perfectly normal, perfectly explainable. She lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag tighter, forcing her muscles to unclench. The monitors flickered, the data stream painting a steady acoustic profile of the canyon below. Emily's eyes grew heavy again, the rationalization doing its sedative work. She drifted, not fully asleep, hovering in that fragile space between consciousness and oblivion. And then the hydrophone picked up a voice, her father's voice, recorded 30 years ago on a worn-out VHS tape she'd memorized as a child, but now distorted, waterlogged. "Emmy, sweetheart, can you hear me?" Emily's eyes flew open, her body locking rigid beneath the sleeping bag. She knew that voice knew the exact cadence, the way he always called her Emmy instead of Emily. It was impossible, a psychotic hallucination, a trick of exhaustion and auditory pareidolia. But the voice came again, clearer now, closer to the hydrophone. "It's so dark down here, baby, so cold, I can't find the surface. You're holding your breath, your chest a locked vault of air." She sat up, swinging her feet onto the deck, the metal cold as a mortuary slab. The monitors showed no biological sources near the hydrophone, just the static signature of the canyon floor, but the voice, it was inside the feed, layered underneath the baseline hiss, speaking with the hydrophone's own circuitry as a larynx. Emily reached for the volume dial, her fingers trembling, and twisted it down. The speaker went silent, the cabin plunging into a heavy, ringing quiet. She sat there in the dark, breathing in shallow sips, convincing herself it was a sleep deprivation episode, 60 hours with minimal rest. The pressure of her thesis, the grief she'd never fully processed, it all made a terrible kind of sense. She would shut down the feed, Radio the shore station. Request an early extraction in the morning. Then the speaker came back on, volume still at 0, and the voice spoke directly into the cabin. Emmy, don't turn me off, please. I've been waiting so long, just let me talk to you. The dial was physically disconnected, the circuit broken, but sound bled out of the grill like water through a cracked hull. Emily stared at the speaker, a thin whimper crawling up her throat. This wasn't a hallucination, this was something else. Something using her father's voice as bait. You let out a shuddering breath. The air trembling in your lungs, she lunged for the radio handset mounted above the nav station. Thumbing the transmit switch. Monterey Bay Coast Guard. This is the Cetacean Dream. I'm experiencing a possible acoustic anomaly, requesting immediate voice contact. The speaker crackled, and then her father's voice answered, but now it was parroting her own words back in a garbled, mocking mimicry. This is the Cetacean Dream I'm experiencing. Let me in, Emmy. Let me in. She threw the handset down, the plastic clattering across the nav table, her skin crawling with a primal electric dread. The hydrophone wasn't recording anymore, it was transmitting. And whatever was at the other end of that cable had learned to use human speech, but it hadn't learned, it had stolen, pulled the memory from her grief-soaked mind, like a deep-sea anglerfish dangling its luminous lure. You're breathing fast, too fast, the edges of your vision starting to sparkle. Emily's eyes darted to the porthole, the moon casting a silver blade across the black Pacific. The water was calm, flat as polished obsidian, but something shifted beneath the surface, a pale shape, vast and amorphous, gliding just deep enough to distort the moonlight. It was moving upward, rising from the canyon with a patient, unhurried certainty. The knocking started, 3 distinct raps against the trawler's hull, slow and deliberate, like knuckles on a door. Boom, boom, boom. Emily screamed, a raw, ragged sound that died in the cramped cabin air. The knocking traveled along the hull, moving from the stern toward the bow as if something was feeling its way around the boat. The speaker gurgled her father's voice, dissolving into a wet, choking laugh. I'm right outside, Emmy. Just open the hatch. It's so cold out here. Let me inside. It was no longer a plea. It was a command delivered with a hungry, impatient edge. Emily pressed herself against the far bulkhead, arms wrapped around her knees, making herself as small as possible. The trawler groaned, a deep, resonant complaint of stressed steel. Something was climbing hand over hand up the anchor chain, the links clanking against the bow roller with a sickening metallic rhythm. Emily could hear the water sloughing off a massive weight, splashing onto the foredeck, the deck plates bending under a load they were never designed to bear. You can't breathe. Your throat closed tight as a fist. She scrambled to her feet, eyes wild, searching for anything that could serve as a weapon. A flare gun hung in a bracket by the door, a fire extinguisher, a marine knife duct-taped to the chart table. She grabbed the flare gun, the red plastic cold and slick in her sweating palm, and pointed it at the cabin door. The hatch was a single watertight steel door, dogged shut with 4 heavy clamps, but it suddenly seemed impossibly fragile. The knocking moved to the cabin door, 3 soft, almost gentle taps, tap, 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 then silence, a long, stretched-out vacuum of quiet that was somehow worse than the noise. Emily stared at the door, the flare gun trembling in her grip, the barrel describing small, frantic circles in the air. The speaker whispered, the voice now stripped of any human pretense, reduced to a wet, gurgling hiss. Smell you, warm beating, let me taste. The cabin door began to breathe. The steel panel flexed inward, just slightly, then relaxed, then flexed again, matching a slow, oceanic rhythm. Condensation beaded on the metal, icy droplets rolling down the painted surface, as if something on the other side was exhaling against it. Emily fired the flare gun, a blinding magnesium-white lance that ricocheted off the door and embedded itself in the overhead, filling the cabin with choking red smoke and searing light. You cry out. A sharp, desperate sound lost in the chaos. The breathing stopped, and for one fragile moment, Emily thought she'd driven it away. She stood in the swirling smoke, coughing, the flare sputtering and hissing above her, painting her shadow huge and distorted on the bulkhead. Then the cabin speaker produced a new sound, a slow, deliberate scraping, talons of bone or calcified chitin dragging across the outer hull. The scraping circled the cabin, rising toward the roof, and stopped directly above her head. Something heavy, enormous, settled onto the roof of the wheelhouse. The ceiling groaned inward, the aluminum frame deforming, a spiderweb of stress fractures blooming across the paint. Emily could hear it shifting, adjusting its weight, and then directly above the speaker grill, a soft, wet mouth pressed against the metal. It began to whisper, but the voice was no longer her father's, it was hers. "Emily, it's okay. I'm safe now. Come outside and see." She looked at the speaker, horrified, listening to her own voice, her own intonations used like a stolen mask. It had learned her, absorbed her acoustic fingerprint from the radio transmission, and now it was wearing her. "You're sobbing, silent and heaving, the flare gun hanging limp at your side." The Coast Guard boarded the Cetacean Dream 17 hours later. After her EPIRB auto-activated and her thesis advisor raised the alarm, the trawler was adrift, engines cold, all systems powered down except the hydrophone feed. The cabin door was unsealed, the steel dogs all thrown open, and a thick gelatinous residue coated the deck from the hatch to the stern. Emily Hartwell was gone, her sleeping bag empty, her equipment logged with a final data entry she never typed. The hydrophone's memory drive contained a single audio file. 17 minutes and 43 seconds of screaming, then a sudden liquid silence, followed by a voice that whispered in perfect mimicry of her. "Never sleep next to the hydrophone. The deep remembers, and it's so hungry." They sealed the recording, classified it under maritime anomaly, and quietly scuttled the Cetacean Dream in water too deep for anyone to ever reach. But the buoy line remains, still transmitting, and some nights when the Monterey Canyon is quiet, the hydrophone picks up a voice that sounds exactly like a frightened girl calling for her father, and if you listen long enough, the father answers from somewhere much, much deeper down. Derek Winslow knew the stories. He'd spent 6 months cataloging them. The Abyssal Echo, the Cetacean Dream, 2 vessels lost to the deep under circumstances no one could explain. He was a paranormal investigator, a YouTuber with 500,000 subscribers, and he'd finally secured the coordinates of the last known hydrophone buoy. Tonight, he would be the first person to deliberately sleep next to the deep-sea hydrophone and broadcast the results live. The chartered vessel was a rusted crab boat called the Night Searcher, captained by a grizzled Maine lobsterman named Walter Thibodeau. Walter didn't believe in ghosts, but he'd spent 50 years on the Atlantic and knew when water felt wrong. "You sure about this, son?" the old man had asked, his gravelly voice thick with unspoken warning. Derek had laughed, adjusted his night vision camera rig, and told him it was just content. "You breathe slowly." The confidence of ignorance settling in your chest. They anchored above the Cascadia Abyss, a deep sea trench 40 miles off the Maine coast. Water blacker than ink under an overcast sky, the hydrophone buoy was still transmitting, a lonely acoustic beacon planted by a research team that had abandoned it 3 years ago. Derek had hacked the feed, piping the live audio directly into the cabin speaker system. He set up 3 cameras, one facing his bunk, one aimed at the porthole, and a body cam strapped to his chest. Walter retreated to the wheelhouse, muttering something about damn fools and deep water, leaving Derek alone in the forward cabin. The hydrophone feed crackled through the speakers, a low symphony of abyssal groans and distant tectonic murmurs. Derek settled into his sleeping bag, the cabin lit by the pale blue glow of his monitoring screens. He checked the live stream, chat exploding with emojis, 15,000 viewers watching in real time. You smirk, the validation drowning out the whisper of unease. He spoke into his lavalier mic, narrating the setup for the audience. "All right, guys, we're live over the Cascadia Abyss, depth 12,000 feet. I'm gonna crash right here with the hydrophone on full blast if anything weird happens. You'll see it first." He threw a mock salute at the camera, clicked off the cabin light, and closed his eyes. The first 2 hours passed without incident, the hydrophone humming its primordial drone, chat slowly dropping to a few hundred insomniacs. Derek's breathing evened out, the exhaustion of the day's voyage pulling him down into a dreamless sleep. The cameras kept recording, the live stream ticked on, and the deep-sea microphone listened. Then, at 3:07 a.m., the speaker emitted a single perfect tone, a pure sine wave, sustained for exactly 4 seconds. Like a tuning fork pressed against the hydrophone housing, Derek stirred, but didn't wake. His brow furrowing in the dark, the chat exploded. Viewers spamming question marks and skull emojis, but no one could do anything. Your eyelids flutter, the sound tunneling into your subconscious. The tone stopped, replaced by a deep, rhythmic thudding, slow and mechanical, like a heart beating in a pressurized chamber. Thud, thud, thud. The entire cabin resonated with it, the hull plates vibrating in sympathy, a subtle hum that rattled Derek's teeth in his sleep. He rolled onto his side, a cold sweat beginning to sheen on his forehead. But the grip of exhaustion was too strong. The hydrophone feed crackled, and a voice oozed through the static. Not human, not machine, something between a chorus of 1,000 whispers layered into a single coherent sentence. "Derek, you invited us in." His eyes snapped open, the darkness of the cabin suddenly suffocating. You gasp, a sharp, reflexive intake of cold air. He fumbled for the cabin light, his fingers slapping against the plastic switch. The bulb flickered on, casting a jaundiced yellow glow across the cramped space. But the shadows in the corners seemed deeper than they should be. The speaker was still active, the heart thud continuing, but the voice had gone silent. Derek stared at the camera, its red light blinking, the live stream still running. He forced a laugh for the audience, his voice cracking at the edges. Okay, that was creepy. Probably just audio interference from the buoy's relay system, but the chat was screaming. Dozens of viewers posting timestamps, claiming they'd heard their own names whispered through their phone speakers. One message pinned itself to the top of the feed, a donation with a note attached. "Turn off the stream. We're in your room now." You swallow hard, the laugh dying in your throat. Derek lunged for the laptop, slamming the lid shut, but the stream didn't die. The screen stayed black. The camera light still red, the feed still broadcasting. He hit the power button, held it down for 10 full seconds. The laptop refusing to obey. The speaker gurgled, and the voice returned, now sounding amused. "You can't turn it off. We're already in the signal. You let us in when you fell asleep." Derek ripped the power cord from the wall. The laptop flickered and died, the red light finally extinguishing. He sat there in the humming silence, chest heaving, the hydrophone still playing its wet, rhythmic pulse. The cabin felt smaller, the walls pressing inward, the air gone thick with the taste of brine and something older, something rotten. Your breathing in short, ragged bursts, the walls of reality flexing. He scrambled out of the bunk, bare feet hitting the cold deck, and ran for the cabin door. The hatch was a heavy steel oval, dogged shut from the inside, but when he grabbed the handle, it wouldn't budge. He threw his weight against it, shoulder grinding into the metal, the dogs refusing to release. Through the small porthole, he could see the aft deck, and Walter Thibodeau standing motionless at the stern rail. "Walter." Derek screamed, pounding on the glass. The old lobsterman didn't turn, didn't react, just stared down at the water. Then Walter raised one hand and waved a slow mechanical gesture as if his arm was being operated by someone else. The speaker in the cabin laughed, a wet, choking sound. "The captain is ours now. He's been listening longer than you." We whispered to him while he slept at the helm. Derek watched in horror as Walter, still waving, stepped up onto the rail and tipped forward into the black Atlantic without a splash. No sound, no struggle, just a silent disappearance into water that seemed to swallow him willingly. You cry out, the scream tearing at your throat, but emerging as a ragged whisper. Derek backed away from the porthole, his mind a cyclone of pure, unraveling terror. The hydrophone feed shifted, the heart thud accelerating, and the voice began to sing, a lullaby, ancient and tuneless, the words in a language that predated human speech. Yet somehow he understood every syllable. It was singing about the dark between stars, the cold that sleeps beneath the seafloor, the hunger that never dies. He clamped his hands over his ears, but the singing was inside his head now, resonating in the cavities of his skull. The cabin lights flickered, the bulb dimming to a bruised purple, and the shadows in the corners began to move. They peeled off the walls, shapeless and wet, sliding across the deck toward his feet. Derek stumbled backward, tripping over his own sleeping bag, and slammed into the camera tripod. The body cam was still strapped to his chest, the red light blinking steadily, recording everything. He looked down at it, and in the small LCD display, he saw his own face, but wrong. His eyes were black, pupil and iris swallowed by an oily darkness, and his mouth was moving, forming words he wasn't speaking. The display showed his lips curling into a smile, and a voice that wasn't his own, emanating from his own throat. "Thank you for the invitation. The door is open now. We've been waiting so long. You're hyperventilating." The terror total and absolute. He tore the body cam off, hurled it against the bulkhead, the plastic shattering into a spray of shards, but the recording continued, the broken lens staring up at him, still transmitting, still watching. The singing in his head rose to a crescendo, a wall of eldritch harmony that drove him to his knees. He pressed his forehead against the cold deck, sobbing, begging, promising anything. The hydrophone speaker crackled, and the voice shifted, now soft, almost gentle. "Shh, it's almost over. You're going to be part of the signal now, forever, just like the others." Derek felt something cold and impossibly heavy settle over his body, a pressure that wasn't physical, but spiritual, pressing his consciousness down into a pinpoint of light. The cabin faded, the night searcher dissolving around him, and for one crystalline moment, he was nowhere. Then he was everywhere. His awareness stretched across 12,000 feet of black water, scattered through the hydrophone array, broadcast across the entire Atlantic seabed. He could feel the other voices, thousands of them, souls that had been absorbed over centuries, all whispering together in an eternal choir. You can't move, can't think, only listen as the last fragments of self dissolve. The Coast Guard found the night searcher adrift at dawn, engines dead, cabin empty, the hydrophone feed still running. The live stream had continued for 4 hours after Derek's disappearance, broadcasting static and occasional bursts of distorted, layered speech. Forensic analysis of the audio identified over 300 distinct voices, including Dr. Alan Kessler, Emily Hartwell, and a man whose voice matched Derek Winslow, but spoke in a tone that was no longer human. They tried to recover the body cam footage, but every file was corrupted, replaced by a single looping image, a dark ocean, an endless trench, and in the deepest part of the frame, a pale, enormous eye, staring directly into the lens. The final frame showed the eye blinking, slowly, deliberately, and a single line of text overlaid on the darkness. "Never sleep next to the deep-sea hydrophone. We are still listening." The buoy still transmits, its signal picked up by passing ships who don't know better, and sometimes on still nights. Fishermen report hearing a voice on their VHF radios, young and desperate, offering them a choice: turn off the feed or join us. But by the time they hear the warning, they've already been listening too long, and the abyss has already learned their names. And now you know the rule: never sleep next to the deep-sea hydrophone. 3 ships, 3 crews, and a darkness that learned their names. But the abyss doesn't rest. It waits, it listens, and right now, somewhere in the hadal depths, a microphone is still on, the voices are still there. layered in static, whispering your name if you're quiet enough to hear. You've just witnessed 3 true accounts from the true terror files. If these stories crawled under your skin, if the sound of the deep ocean has you checking your own speakers, then we've done our job. Our channel exists to unearth the real-life horror that lurks beneath the surface, and we can only do that with your support, so please, smash that like button if the abyss sent a chill down your spine. Subscribe and ring the bell, so you never miss a descent into the unknown, and drop a comment below. Tell us which story kept you awake, or share your own deep-sea nightmares. We read every single one. Take a slow breath, the darkness settling around you. These stories aren't just fiction. They're warnings passed from sailors and scientists who dared to listen too close. So the next time you're near the ocean, or even if you're just drifting off in your own bed, ask yourself what's at the other end of the signal, and are you ready to hear it? The deep doesn't dream, but you might sleep tight. But keep the speaker off, and remember, True Terror Files Official is always listening, right alongside you.